Welcome back to VMworld Live. I'm John Troyer here in Copenhagen for VMworld 2010. For our next segment, I'm very pleased to have with us Alex Cabanes from IBM. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, John.
So you work in the virtualization group with IBM.
Yes.
And so, can you tell us, spend a few minutes to tell us about what's IBM's perspective on virtualization and about cloud computing?
Okay. Well, what we've been seeing is working with our customers that they tend to go through discrete stages in their process, in their virtualization journey, if you will. Typically, they start around consolidating their resources, whether they're servers, storage, or networking infrastructure. Once they consolidate, they get a lot of capital expenditure value and savings out of that process. Then they tend to progress through subsequent stages, eventually leading to cloud computing.
Okay, yeah, the virtualization journey is something that VMware talks about a lot.
Absolutely.
And those different stages. So they start with consolidation. And after that, what are some of the next stages that you all see from your customers you're working with?
Well, what we tend to see is that customers still deal with the inherent complexity. Just because you've taken, say, 100 applications that were distributed over 100 servers and now they're running on 10 servers, you still have to manage that infrastructure. So the next stage that we tend to see customers go through is focused on effectively managing the workloads to improve the staff productivity with this new virtualized and physical infrastructure.
So management becomes an issue.
Absolutely.
In the next stage. Are there other unanticipated challenges that people hit as they go forward?
So what they realize is that once they have a handle on effectively managing both the physical and the virtual workloads, that the processes can be somewhat repetitive. And so they tend to focus their energies on automating the processes so they're able to take advantage of best practices, service level agreements, and business priorities, and codify them into repeatable processes that are more aligned with the business.
So we've talked about some of the benefits of the first part. So obviously there's huge CapEx savings in the beginning when you're doing server consolidation, and then what are some of the drivers? Why are people doing this? I mean, do they recognize, is it about agility? Is it about speed to market? Is it about cost savings? What are some of the drivers here?
Well, I think all of those are drivers that motivate our customer set. I think that as they go through these different phases, ultimately leading to cloud computing, or what we term optimized delivery, it's effectively moving the discussion beyond efficiency of the IT infrastructure and focusing more on the effectiveness of the business that the IT infrastructure supports.
So optimized delivery. Tell me, I'm not familiar with the term, but I like the idea. We often talk about cloud computing being part of it being a consumption model.
Right.
And it sounds like that's what you're getting at with this term optimized delivery. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that?
So when we talk about optimized delivery, what we're basically doing is we're taking all of the automated processes that are the best practices and basically surfacing them to the business users so that they can self-provision through a portal. And that really allows us to align IT infrastructure and prioritization with the business priorities. Okay. And that could be both for a private cloud behind the firewall or even a public cloud.
Now we talk about a journey, and we make it seem as if there's one step in front of the other, and that everyone implies that there's a path, and everyone follows the same journey. I know we see patterns, but as you work with customers, I mean, are these really sequential steps, or how are people approaching this and different paths to the cloud computing?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, because what we see is that customers don't necessarily go through these steps sequentially, and the journeys are going to be slightly different depending on the customer. A good example that I like to use is Panasonic. Panasonic did not want to deal with a lot of the complexity of patching Windows servers and Exchange servers and managing disk space as well as their x86 environment. So they basically contacted IBM and were able to utilize a cloud offering from IBM called Lotus Live. And so Panasonic no longer is dealing with the collaboration infrastructure. They're able to source approximately 300,000 users using the Lotus Live offering from IBM directly through the cloud.
And that's in a public cloud.
And that's in a public cloud.
Right.
Now, that's a great example because they didn't view that as a core competency of their business, whereas, let's say something like their inventory management system, they chose not to deploy that in the cloud. So that's an example even where a customer can choose to deploy different systems or different applications at different stages depending on core competencies and their risk profile for that.
How are enterprises approaching the public cloud versus hybrid cloud or private cloud deployments, and what kind of workloads are they looking at as candidates?
I think that right now they're looking at what they would view lower risk type of applications that are not typical of their core competencies. So I think Panasonic is a great example of taking the email services and the collaboration services and just basically sourcing that directly from the cloud.
Well, what are some of the barriers that people are encountering as they increase their levels of virtualization, and then as they try to go towards this cloud computing operational stance?
Well, I think that one of the challenges that customers face is that they have to re-engineer the processes, and I think that when many of our customers start along this journey, they look at the technology, but then they soon realize that it has implications as to how they run their business, and so it really has ramifications to the business priorities, the business processes, and you're really not able to effectively gain the maximum benefit of virtualization in this journey that we're on towards cloud computing without fundamentally re-examining and re-engineering those business processes.
I mean, does that imply a shift in the basic nature of IT in the enterprise?
I think it is a fundamental shift. I think that in the past, IT has been looked as very much a organization that was separate from the business environment and the business priorities. And I think more and more those two are getting much more conjoined and no longer viewed as somewhat distinct and separate.
How can we, I mean, VMware as a technology vendor and IBM as a solutions and technology vendor, if we're trying to engender some fundamental and almost philosophical change in how IT is run and how the CIO is perceived, and how can we help customers make these kind of shifts?
I think what we have to do is make it simple for them and not make it an all or nothing. It has to be very discrete, managed process so that they're able to mitigate the risk and not make it one extreme or not. So it's more of a continuum, more gradual.
Yeah, take some. Yeah, I guess as implied by the journey term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you've been here in Europe at Copenhagen this week, talking to European customers. Are you located here in Europe?
I'm actually based out of the States with worldwide responsibility.
Okay. Do you see a difference in the European market versus the say American market?
There are some differences, but I think that once you get past some of the regional differences, you start seeing repeatable requirements, repeatable processes across the board. I think that there's perhaps different levels of concerns. For example, I know within the European Union, there's a lot of concerns with regard to regulatory compliance and privacy issues that are not so prevalent in the American market. And so I think that when we look at virtualization and the processes that customers go through, we have to have sensitivities when we talk about service level agreements as to not just SLA from a high availability perspective, but also with regard to security and data integrity, if you will, to comply with regulatory compliance.
Are there misconceptions as you talk to customers, especially in these early stages of the journey, misconceptions about going to the cloud or increasing their virtualization levels?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that I'm seeing is that there's deep technical proficiency with regard to virtualization, but when it gets into the discussion around businesses and what the implications are to businesses, those are not always very well aligned. So
Sometimes
the,
that's out.
the expectations could be out of sync with the reality.
Yeah, sometimes IT is uncomfortable. Although we'd like to be business partners, sometimes we're uncomfortable having that conversation, I think.
It can be uncomfortable at times. So.
Great. But I got to say that we do seem we're at some sort of a fundamental shift in a phase shift in IT, and all this stuff, it seems to be very exciting to me.
It's absolutely exciting. We're absolutely overwhelmed with the response we've gotten here. So, I mean,
Great.
it's really been a great show for us.
Yeah, no, it's been a fantastic show, and it's going to be a fun year at Thanks. Alex Cabanes, thanks for coming by.
Thank you.